That's what everyone's so excited about with digital landscape is you can gather so much information and then you can do stuff with that information.
That information will come to your house and kill you.
Soon. Soon for sure.
One day.
They don't know what I know.
Let's do a podcast.
All right.
Woohoo!
Welcome back to another episode of Zengineering. That's episode 10,
Episode 10, baby.
which I'm Adam,
I'm Brian.
and episode 10 means we're following through on our promise to have our first guest,
Yeah.
which
Woo!
may very well be a train wreck, but we'll
It's possible. I was going to call this episode 1. That's wrong.
we'll do the best we can. That's Mike.
Guest,
To Mike, this is episode 1.
guest episode number 1.
Yes. Thank you very much for trusting me to be the first one.
Yeah, man.
Hell yeah, buddy.
So should we introduce Mike or just start talking about shit and you can be like, okay, that voice knows what he's talking about?
Yeah, let's introduce. Why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm not interesting enough to have too much talk about me, I don't think. I write funny things. I think they're funny. I think they work. I have medium confidence in it. But I've known the host of the show for a very long time. And
known me for 20 years and
yeah.
Brian for 25 or something like that.
29.
Right?
29 for T. Brian. And we always have fun conversations about interesting things. And the fact you guys are doing a podcast, it's basically a fun conversation about an interesting thing.
Totally.
It made me really want to be involved. And so I'm glad that that y'all said it was cool.
Hell
so,
yeah. Thanks
so
for
this
hopping on.
week's interesting thing, you can't see it, but I'm doing a segue. We're all in person for the first time today. Jones and I usually do this remotely.
Oh yeah, that's another.
We're
special
actually standing in
aspect.
the same room, so I'm excited that he can see me dance.
It's actually probably going to be distracting, and will make things harder to do.
You're right. I'll try not to dance so much.
When you do, I'm just going to go dance.
Dancing machine.
And just let it be known that a dance is happening.
So I feel like Mike, you're probably gonna end up being a regular guest because there
That'd be
are
nice.
so many things you could talk about.
Agreed.
And in this case, you're not really even here to talk about your profession or what you do, any of that kind of stuff. You're here because you're a sports fan.
Yes,
And
more so than
while-
everybody else here.
While I'm an athlete, I'm not particularly a sports fan.
Right.
And Brian doesn't really know what sports are.
Yep.
I go outside all the time.
Some of the
I'm
sports are played
constantly
outside. Many are not.
Is that a sport?
You understand activities.
Right.
That's not true. You play volleyball.
I
which-
play
that's a sport.
activity.
Yeah, and
that's
you
for sure.
surf. Like those are
Yeah.
sports. Those are things.
Some would argue maybe they're not, but yeah,
I'm being nice with the surfing thing, but the volleyball definitely is.
that
Volleyball's
turn-
definitely a sport.
Oh,
volleyball's
absolutely.
definitely. Yeah, I do
Yeah.
play a sport now.
Is golf
It's
a
true.
sport?
Nah.
Golf is an activity. So here's the deal.
Golf's you swing a stick by yourself on your lawn. I don't think it's
So
a sport.
I forgot who said it, but someone once tried to classify it as saying that things are only sports if somebody else's efforts directly impact your own success or failure. So, for example, in a foot race or say a swimming race, which Adam's more familiar with than anyone else here,
A fin race.
a fin race,
Yeah, a webbed.
a fin-based race, a duck
fin-based
race.
Yes.
You have to swim a certain speed and you have to swim a certain distance, but you only win if you've done it faster than the guy next to you. And in soccer, you only win if you score more than the guys across from you. And in boxing, you only win if the other guy who's punching you in the face punches you in the face with less velocity and less strength and possibly fewer times. And in golf, you're kind of playing against the course. I like playing golf. It's really, really fun. I would say if you're following that criteria, then it's not a sport.
I like that criteria. That's interesting.
Do you think that therein lies the merit? So we skipped over the intro part, which is
We don't need an intro.
Mike's here to try to sell us on the relevance of sports.
Yes. the relevance
In a
and the
different
interest.
sense.
Yeah.
I understand the relevance of taking part in sport, I think. I appreciate that. I advocate for that. But even if you've listened to previous episodes of the podcast, when Brian and I talk about the state of football on a Sunday, it's not in the most glowing
Sure.
We try to
fashion.
remain neutral.
And
Was it?
I said we try to remain neutral.
we say neutral things.
Yeah. That's what a good civilized human being
But-
does.
So to you, do you think that do you think the definition that you're cruising toward when you say that with sport, does that encapsulate also the merit of sport? as a spectator sports?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I once wrote something back when I thought I could write for the New Yorker. I wrote this essay trying to explain why people liked sports, because here's the other thing about me is I'm very aware that others don't share my opinions. and believe it or not, many people are not. Many people are like, this is simply reality and everyone else is crazy. However, I know that people don't always see it the same way. And so in an effort to explain it, I thought that sports were the people who love watching sports. They love the idea of history, but only in a very selfish way. And they like the idea of religion, but they kind of require a more concrete amount of like tangible proof. Here's what I'm talking about. A big portion of sports fandom, especially like...
You're a sports fan, right?
Yeah.
You consider yourself a sports, just broadly stated, I'm a sports fan?
I am a sports fan. I like most sports. In fact, I gave a very, very wide effort to become a fan of soccer recently.
Cool.
Simply because I know it is the most popular sport in the world. I didn't quite understand it, and I knew that I was wrong because everyone else liked it. This is, again, so I knew my opinion was incorrect at this point.
The way I usually say, I like watching my teams. Like I like watching the Ravens play, but I don't enjoy watching a, quote, good game.
Sure. And
I don't want to watch college football on a Saturday just because a good game might happen. If my teams aren't playing, I don't give a shit.
It's an interesting point because that actually kind of connects more to this whole history and religion thing, which I'll explain in a moment. Because I'm with you in certain sports. Like, I will watch every single football game I possibly can, whether my team is playing or not, because I see some sort of relevance to my team regardless. In fact, I got a really hilarious quasi-argument with my wife about this. Because she's a born and raised Angelino, and this is the year, if she wants to become a Rams fan, that she can, because you can't become a bandwagon fan later. She's already kind of a Ravens fan because she has to live with me. But the interesting thing, oh shit, what was I talking about?
You're talking about fandom, like being a fan of sport versus
yeah,
fan
sorry.
of
All
a
right.
team.
So basically, like she was like, the thing that she was bumping up against was she was like, "Will you root for the Rams if the Ravens aren't playing?" And I said, "Yes, if there's no impact on the Ravens." She goes, "What do you mean?" And she goes, "Well,
It's a lot of calculating.
there are divisions, there are other games. You have to race in the AFC and the AFC North, blah blah blah. So most games matter." And she's like, "So no?" And I'm like, well, "Probably not."
And while you were rambling, she left the room and you didn't notice.
I had no idea. Yeah. But it's funny you say that because so why would you watch a game for of a team playing that you didn't care about? Part of it is in the event that something quote unquote historical happens. The T-shirts that are the most kind of ubiquitous sports T-shirts of all time are the "I was there" shirt.
Yeah.
And very often you buy that shirt kind of to say, "Oh yeah, in 2008, my brother and I went to Tennessee to watch the Ravens play in a divisional game, and this happened and it rained and my brother didn't wear a coat because he's crazy, and this random Titans fan." All these facts, all this information, it all comes from the "I was there" T-shirt. The other thing is if you see something like quote unquote miraculous, and that is the religious aspect of it. You have to admit there's a lot of deification going on in sports, especially when people build statues of athletes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's
absolutely.
literally golden calves.
There's worship. I mean, everyone. That's an obvious theme
Concrete
in,
calves.
yeah,
in
right.
sports at all ages is the worship factor.
Right.
That if you're the high school football quarterback,
Yeah.
you're a huge fucking deal.
Well, it's interesting because then you have that Charles Barkley thing of like we shouldn't be role models, right? Like when you deify them, it becomes like I should be like that person, and then they go, well, you shouldn't. That person shouldn't cheat on their wife because you're a role model. And it's like, no, I rose to prominence because I'm really good at an activity over here. My job is to be good at that activity.
That's a really interesting point, and
an interesting topic,
people separate that in all endeavors, not just in sports. And I'm not trying to digress too much too quickly because I'm gonna do it. But Woody Allen, for example. I have friends who are diehard, crazy Woody Allen fans, and what they all do now that the facts are kind of out and it's getting ickier and ickier with that guy, it's like I'm separating the guy from his work. Right. And to an extent, when your running back in 2004 goes to jail for conspiracy to traffic cocaine, you kind of have to separate the guy from the activity. Otherwise, what are you doing? You're cheering for the drug dealer? Like that's what you're doing?
Bill Cosby would be the context to bring that
Excellent
up right
example.
now, right?
Excellent
like
example.
the fact that what he did for comedy was groundbreaking, and that I still listen to himself and which
Yeah.
is confusing if I don't explain that Himself is a Bill Cosby album that he recorded.
You listen to He.
But if you, it's still a great album.
Yeah.
The jokes are still funny.
For sure.
So
I'm
Yeah,
disappointed
you need
that he
to separate
turned out
these
to be a
things.
creeper.
So Gerard Carmichael is a brilliant stand-up and has a show on NBC called Carmichael Show, and he actually did an episode about Cosby that got a lot of buzz because it wasn't a blanket roasting of Bill Cosby. It was basically like, how do we deal with these feelings of growing up with this person who's basically America's dad? Like, he was like the patriarch of the first kind of post All in the Family comedy that actually was like kind of talking about stuff. How do you deal with that with the like 1,500 people he obviously violated in some horrible way?
Right.
Right.
But and sports is a similar way. And so the question is, what are we as sports fans getting that is worth that conversation?
Well, it forces you to look at what are you actually a fan of.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you look at, and this maybe can take us back to a little broader view of fandom and stuff that you tend to get behind or get excited about or connect with or become a member of.
Like Dungeons and Dragons.
Definitely like Dungeons and Dragons. Why are
We're all in a safe place on that topic.
Why are you a Star Trek person versus a Star Wars person? Why are you a fan of a particular person on
And
your
why
team?
does
Why are
it
you
matter?
a Ravens
And
fan?
why do you defend it?
Yes, absolutely.
Right. So what are you in?
Why do you try to convince other people they should not be the other thing?
Exactly.
Like,
What is
fuck
that?
orcs.
And
fuck
that's
elves. That shit's bitch ass. I'm into androids. Like, what? It's
and
all.
that's what the root of all this stuff is. That's like
Yeah, it
the
is.
common theme is there's something you want everyone else to want what you want. You want everyone else to like what you want. You sell it, you stand behind it, even when it's wrong. You stand behind Bill Cosby because you love him, even if he's out raping 1,000 people.
Yeah.
So
He didn't get
What
to
do you
1,000.
really-
Well, I'm saying you stand
He
behind
said
him because
1,500
his
a minute
jokes are
ago.
funny.
That's true. I was lying. What's that?
I'm saying you stand behind him. I don't love him, but I stand behind him because his jokes are still funny.
You have to-
That album is
You
still.
you have to stand behind him because in
funny.
front of him.
So
terrible
you're
what's gonna happen.
So
Right.
with in the bill. I don't actually want to talk about Bill Cosby. He's a bad example because he's very negative. Let's go back to let's do what's Woody Allen? What's happening with Woody Allen?
Woody
That's
Allen-
also
Is he a creeper
very
too?
negative.
It's
Why is everyone a
pretty
fucking
negative.
creeper?
I don't know. It's a shame.
Stop being creepers.
Here's
Just
the
do
thing.
cool stuff and be a good person.
Based on what you're saying a second ago, as far as like creating the Star Trek group and creating the Star Wars group, I think a lot of it is weird tribalism that still in some way makes us feel more safe. I think in a weird way, if you are surrounded by like-minded people or people that all have something in common, I think you have a little bit of like, I'm okay in this cave and nothing's going to eat me. Like, so I was in Barcelona in 2010, which is a really fun place, by the way. I recommend everyone goes. And there was a dude on our double-decker bus who had a Orioles hat on. And we immediately became like best friends. Like, I talked to this guy forever, the entire time. I don't know what he did. We had nothing in common. It's just we were in this foreign country and we had this thing about ourselves that we shared. And that to me is a very small example of the feeling you get when you're packed in a group room full of people where everyone's supporting a team that's doing something. And you know, it obviously goes to extreme lengths, like in my newly explored realm of soccer. Fans do crazy things, like a Colombian ref had his head pulled off after he stabbed a player. I mean, so things have happened
How do you pull a ref's head off?
with a lot of people.
somebody got
And
stabbed.
A lot of
Humans
people. Yes.
pulled his head
They
off?
tied him to a tree and they pulled off his head.
Like right then? Was it a rash decision?
Well, I don't think anyone thinks it through and goes, you know what we got to do? Let's pull
Let's
this
have a
man's
vote.
head up.
The
Let's
eyes
have a
have
vote.
it.
It's
Hey, somebody got stabbed with a pencil a few years ago in Hall H at Comic-Con.
really.
Purely by accident.
Oh, but guess what?
I'm
No,
sure
it was
someone was just
aggressive.
rushing
No,
to
it was
sign
angry
an
at someone else.
autograph. and
That
hand
must
got
happen
away.
all the time for exactly the reason you're talking about. For the Star Wars people and the Star Trek people that are getting each other's face.
But so then what is it that makes sports, to take it back to the original
Yep.
topic, and the idea of fandom, why is sports fandom so much more accessible to people than the fandom that we consistently talk about with Star Trek and nerd things and whatever, right? Like the tribalism, I get it happens. How come everyone's into sports?
Yeah, why are sports so
and then
prolific
those sports
in the world?
people think you're bitch ass if you're into dragons.
Well, I can't speak to the bitch ass elements of it because I'm okay with a dragon. I do enjoy a good dragon movie.
I'm awesome because I'm into dragons.
Yeah,
just to be
dragons are
clear.
great.
But I think it's generally fair to assume
There is an
the
odds versus them
jock
mentality.
nerd dichotomy
Sure.
that exists.
Definitely. Certainly when we were growing up.
I think
Less so
that
now, but-
Maybe it seems that way on TV shows.
I think that part of I think that the physical nature of the sport and sort of celebrating someone's physical abilities is a little easier for everyone to get behind rather than looking into too much nuance. And this is coming from somebody who loves sport. Like I love sports.
That's fair.
And if I watched, for example, I was watching Arsenal Watford this morning, which is played thousands and thousands of miles away from where
I think
we
that's
live.
a really funny thing about being in the States and being a European soccer fan is that like you got to wake up at 6 in the morning to
Yeah.
catch your games. It's so different than football on Sunday where you like roll out of bed half hungover, have some hair to the dog.
Oh, you got to put effort in
Catch your-
to do this. You really got to put effort in.
You're still waking up hungover and going to drink, though, I think.
Yeah.
Is the key to
You're just
European
waking up
sports.
to an alarm clock.
By the
rather
way,
than the
that's
sun.
also an interesting point, which is I'll mention in one moment. But I think watching that game, yeah, everyone in the stadium wanted one team to win. But I think it's base level. Watching Mesut Ozil play, both of you guys would watch Mesut Ozil play and go, that dude's doing something kind of amazing. Like that guy can kick a ball on a dime, full sprint while running, and land it right on someone's head at the perfect angle where only he can get it, and where he will go forward like a quarter of an inch with his head and put the ball in the net. Like that is it's a remarkable physical thing, and I think that it's more difficult perhaps for people that have played sports at a high level, such as Adam, because I don't think you're not quite as in awe of the things that people do in a pool, because not only have you done most of them, but the people who have done like the most incredible things in the pool of all time, you eat chicken wings with and stuff. You know what I mean? So there isn't that sort of like whoa. Plus, I think that there's a lot of regionalism with it. And I think that it all kind of speaks to this primitive notion of our town has the best guy. So
And he can beat up your guys, so you better not go to war against us.
Right?
Is this just war games?
Basically, it means we're going to be able to survive
the
the
argument
winter.
I would make.
It's true. It's totally true. And the sort of binary I win, you lose mentality of most sports, and soccer's a little different because there are ties, but there are good ties and bad ties, is kind of that whole, we've conquered and we've pillaged and now we're going to burn the place to the ground.
So let's take this to some other places where people are fans now and see what else we can tease out.
Well, Adam just went to the Springsteen show.
Well, first, I want to talk about something real quick before we get off sports.
Okay.
As much as I'm welcome.
Shocking.
As much as I welcome that. Explain for our listeners, Mike, relegation.
Oh, so relegation is amazing. So relegation in
I
soccer.
think it's
okay.
amazing too,
All
and I
right.
think it should exist in every sport, and I think it should just exist everywhere.
All right, so I'm gonna wind. I completely agree with you. I'm gonna wind up with this by.
Is this where they execute the losing team every year?
You're really close.
So close.
So basically, it's funny because so many people are like,
Figuratively.
yeah, so many people are like, oh, soccer's not an American game. It's not American in spirit. The most American thing about soccer is relegation. Relegation basically means that there's 20 teams in each of the 4 major leagues in England, for example, and every single major league in Europe is like this. The 3 worst teams that season get kicked out. They get kicked out of the league.
Out of the league.
They get
have
booted
to go
down.
to the minor leagues.
Yes, and
the whole team.
Wait, so can
It's like
in American sports, as far as I'm
It's like if the Orioles
have
were last
minor
place
league.
in their division and they had to go down to AAA and
Yes.
play in fucking
And
so you would
Pawtucket for a
bring up
season.
your AAA team
Yes.
as
Yeah.
opposed to cycling people up from it.
So in football, because football is a pretty accessible one as far as the major leagues. It's literally as if this last year, the Tennessee Titans, the Cleveland Browns, and the San Diego Chargers got kicked down to college football, and Alabama, Oregon, and Ohio State were all in the NFL now.
We're all in the NFL,
That's how
yeah.
it works.
The
So basically,
CFL or so.
yeah, the CFL too. Yeah, exactly. The Barnstormers, or not Barnstormers.
Right,
that's Arena League. The Rough Riders.
Rough Riders.
Saskatchewan Rough Riders are all of a sudden in the AFC South. But it's crazy because basically it means if you stink, you still have something to play for because you have to play for survival. And by the way, there's no financial equity at all in English soccer. So like if you get kicked out of Premier League and go down to what's called the Championship League, ironically, it's like tens of millions of euros that you're not getting because of the TV money that's in the Premier League. And so, for example, Norwich beat Newcastle today. Norwich is in 17th place. And they celebrated today like they just won the fucking Super Bowl. Can we curse in here? Sorry. You can
Yes.
beat me up?
Yeah, absolutely.
And they celebrated because they beat Newcastle, which means they can stay up another year, which means they'll get more money. And Newcastle's like, oh my God, if we don't have any money, we can't afford players. We can't afford stadiums.
So it's like a very
anything.
capitalistic
It is-
sports league.
It is the most capitalistic sports league in the entire world.
Versus the NFL, where if you lose for long enough that your city loses interest, you maybe get moved from St. Louis to Los Angeles. And that takes 10 to 15
decades.
years. So one of the things, and I've definitely said this
Good
in
reminder.
the
So long
past
ago.
in the course of this conversation,
We actually had a giant steak dinner between pause and we started.
is like when you're not what you just get to try again next year. And so what are the stakes?
Yeah, what keeps you excited throughout a season?
In a league without relegation, but even with one without relegation, like it's not like your team is all murdered and you never get to see them play again.
Okay.
Like I love the last. I've been saying this since I was a little kid. Why don't you just play the last 2 minutes of every sporting event? The first 30 minutes or 60 minutes or whatever, they're a big fucking waste of time. Just play the last 2 minutes. That will
I
decide
deliberately
the match.
chose a sport where the whole thing is 2 minutes long.
Which sport did you
Race,
just say?
you're done.
The swimming.
Right.
200
exactly.
freestyle.
Exactly.
2-minute race.
That's where all the excitement is.
It's urgent from the second the gun goes off.
What's the point? So there's something else to watching sports besides the victory, because
Yeah.
that is almost always decided in that last, especially football. It's the whole half the actual time of the game is the last 5 minutes of the game.
But
too.
I would say all of the intensity of those last 2 minutes
Basketball's
are
the worst
are
for that.
built by the rest of the game.
is
However,
it foreplay?
yeah, in a weird way. I think that basketball is probably the best example where it's just kind of close and you get to the end and then you kind of see what happens.
Yeah, super boring. You mean?
But you do.
Sorry.
You do. You guys have never been nerdier than in this moment. You had this weird sort of like that was definitely I can't think of the name. That was a like Beavis-esque laugh that you gave.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm like 19 feet tall and have always hated basketball.
Yeah. Oh well.
So-
Well, that's also that's
Doesn't
all the
stop
picture
from
altogether.
everyone ever that's met you from saying, so you play basketball,
Everyone.
right?
Every
My
time
fa-
I leave the house,
my
people pop up
Go to
favorite-
and
college
just-
on a basketball scholarship, did you?
My favorite Jones interaction with anybody about this was we were at a place actually right around the corner from here, and you had clearly just been frustrated and gotten tired of getting the question, and some bouncer checked your ID and goes, "Hey, where'd you play ball?" And you went, "Vanderbilt." And he's like, "All right, SEC." So you went to Vanderbilt for engineering. You did not play. You played some basketball. You got dunked on at one time. Which
I
is
did.
a
I
fun
played basketball one of my first days there, and I think that was it.
story. And that was the end. So basically, I think that it's interesting. It goes to, I know philosophy is a big chunk of this podcast, a big chunk of what you like to talk about. I want to say, was it Weaver? Was he talking about the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain? Is that him?
I have no idea.
All right. So basically,
The part of philosophy I'm really bad at is the part where you remember what
Philosophers?
other people say.
got it.
I remember the ideas. I know
Concepts.
the idea you're talking about,
So
but I
someone
don't
was
care what
basically-
old dudes said.
We like to
You're not
separate from
proving
the
any.
self on our podcast.
Right.
Got it. Well, basically, what they're saying is that every human motivation is made in the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. And I think that what you guys are a little fixated on is only the avoidance of pain as a stake, as opposed to the pursuit of pleasure being the bonus. And I think that the benefit the following year of your sporting event team, whatever it is knowing for certain that someone's going to win. And it might not be you. In football, it's 31-1. It won't be. But it's not about having something disastrous happen and sort of being fearful about losing that. It's about this is an opportunity. Every single season is an opportunity. And the sports that seem to be doing the best. And it's funny because we're talking about, baseball has not done this very well as of late. And basketball, the NBA almost doesn't even like this sort of thing. But football's success is based on the word they always use is parity. And that is every single year, every team has a chance to win. Every fan base, no matter how diluted, they all think they can win it. And so what you're basically doing is you're selling that hope. And it's that hope that's driving the fans. And guess what? if it's like 6 weeks into the season and you're Jacksonville and you're 0-6, you might bail, and you might be like, we'll see what happens next year.
And the reason that you bail, and this is what's interesting versus the idea of relegation, the reason that you bail is because you get a higher draft spot if you're ranked lower in the next year, right? I don't fully understand how that works.
In football, yeah. So football
yes.
is a purely they flip the standings, and that is the order in which you get a thing because football's trying to promote parity, whereas in basketball they do what's called a lottery, and just the worse you are each year, the more chances you have to have a higher pick.
But you do still have a better chance, which is funny because compared to relegation, which is what takes place in Europe,
I know.
The way we do it is the most socialist
Correct.
way I can imagine
and that's
doing
this.
this.
That's the irony of people
While
like,
we freak out about socialism as a bad word.
It's the irony of people like Ann Coulter shouting at the top of her lungs that soccer's not an American sport because there's ties in it. It's like, well, I mean, football's barely an American sport if you look at that
single
thing.
most free market sport.
But by the way,
it's popular.
They make
at
a
least.
joke. So right now in the Premier League, and I'll come back to this in a second. Right now in the Premier League, the number one team is a team called Leicester City. Leicester City is really small. They've never been good. They were supposed to finish dead last. They're in first. And they have arguably the two best players in the league right now. And what all of the sportscasters are saying is, they're all joking and calling them Real Madrid's Jamie Vardy and Barcelona's Riyad Mahrez. Because they're like, eventually Barcelona's going to go, we'll give you $100 million to that guy. And they'll go, okay. And they'll do it. And Vardy wants to play in a big market. He wants to play on huge stages. And so of course he's going to go. He's like, why with that? But it's funny you bring that up because in a way you're tapping into, by talking about the high draft pick socialism of football. The high draft pick is still promoting hope. Because guess what? If you're 0-6 and you're the Jacksonville Jaguars, or better example, my beloved team, the Baltimore Ravens, we were really bad this year. We've been this bad in ages. And at a certain point, the hope of that season was gone and it had been replaced by the hope of the future because we were so bad, we're going to get a really good player next year. So it's this perpetual hope machine. That's basically what sports are, especially football, is this idea of eventually it's going to work out. Now, granted, there's a little bit of a gambler's fallacy with it where it's like, Cleveland has been bad in picking the top 5 for years. They're not getting any better. So there is a meritocracy with like building a team and coaching players up and finding good players and making them better. But it's just the idea of hope. And guess what? In certain towns, it means more than others because that is the focal point of the city's social existence. Baltimore, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Green Bay, even cities like Chicago, which are big metropolitan cities, a lot of the identity of the city is invested in the sports team. Chicago's that way because they've always been in the shadow of New York. But when the Bears are good, they've beaten New York at something. And when the Cubs are good, it was 1907. It's a bad example.
So the hope. So when you talk about hope, right,
Yeah.
it feels like you're saying that
Perpetual
it's
hope
not
machine.
the tribal thing that we were talking about before, right? Like it's not. It's still though hope that your team will be good enough to beat the other team so that Chicago can say that they're better than New York. Though. Like it's still this tribal warfare thing. And so Fandom is, I am part of the tribal group that is better than the other tribal group, and out of that I derive satisfaction.
Yeah.
Right?
But also, like you guys get really excited. I'm looking at Jones right now. You get really excited when like you talk to somebody and they like know a lot about diodes. You know what I mean? They're like they're really excited about building something. Like that's an exciting conversation. And I think that is a bit of tribalism in a way. That is a bit of finding common ground and having something to talk about.
Right.
Not like you have to search for things to talk about, but I'll tell you what, like
Sure you do.
a lot of
Talking to people is hard.
it can be for sure.
And awkward and
It's really hard.
yeah. What do you
yeah.
do with your hands?
In fact, you know what? Oh, it's a great episode.
Fidgeting with things right now, and I'm barely even talking.
So it's a great episode of a show.
To people you've known for 25 years.
There's a great episode of a show called The IT Crowd, which I've watched briefly with you.
Yeah,
we
we've
watched
seen a
all
few
of them. I
episodes.
watched all of them with you. I'm pointing at Adam. This is great radio. But there's a joke about Moss, who's a very nerdy guy who had this like quarterback wristband basically of things to say to football people, soccer people, and it worked every single time. And it was, you see that ludicrous display last night? What's Wenger thinking bringing a Walcott into my face? All right, mind how you go. And he goes through talking to random people about it, and it just kind of works. And he ends up making friends and being involved in a bank robbery. But that's just great comedic writing right there. I think that's part of it, and I think that
Well, so what I think is alienating though to the the nerd folk, the geek crowd, is like, I always describe when people ask, like when I say that I've gone to Comic-Con or something in San Diego, and people ask about how it is, I say it's like the happiest place in the world. Because I talked about it earlier to make a point, but generally the people that are into dragons are pretty cool with the people that are into Star Trek, sci-fi, whatever. Just the interaction is like, oh, dragons are your thing? Right on. I'm into androids.
It's at least the enemy
like,
of your
high
enemy is your
five.
friend.
We have a tribe.
They don't touch each other.
And we're proud of one another for air five.
Just how about just nervous nod.
There's a strange.
Whereas,
there's a strange.
Whereas sports fandom is, sort of aggressively. It's like Raiders fans will try to fight you on the street because you're not a Raiders fan, and unprovoked or provoked by your shirt that's not a Raiders shirt.
Sure.
They'll try to pick a fight with you. And so it's like, so part of it is that thing where how can you advocate for the value of the tribal sort of fraternity, I guess, that comes from sports?
Yeah.
While taking away the part that I think is alienating to me and Brian, which is I don't want to do the part where I'm supposed to yell at Redskins fans that they're pieces of shit because they grew up in a different town.
Well, there's a difference in
team.
the type of fandom. There is a win and lose situation that's layered on top of being a fan of a sport. And for most other things that people are a fan of, because I was thinking about other places we could go with this, talk about fandoms, and specifically things that have the word fan in them, like Apple fanboy. That's a big one right now. We talk about tech on here all the time. People are huge fans of their electronics now, but there's not as much of a raw binary win-lose situation. So there isn't a need to be as polarizing. There's a place that we were starting to talk about earlier, politics, where it's a win-lose, and it's only two teams. And so you see the exact same behaviors emerge, and you see the exact same sort of sometimes mindless gathering behind particular
and violence
entities,
and violence too. For years, violence.
Yeah, violence to the point of civil wars and world wars.
But it's interesting you bring up the Apple thing because I have a lot of Apple stuff, and my wife grew up on PCs. And I gave her my old MacBook.
Why would you marry her?
Huh?
Why would you marry her?
What have you done?
Don't breed.
It's a conversion effort, right?
And she was like, she liked it. It was fine, but it was never her favorite thing in the world. She didn't quite get it the same way. She bought a Microsoft Surface and loves it. And I know people that just feel more comfortable kind of in their zones, but why was that even a conversation? Why would someone basically say, I like this one, I like this, why don't I just have this? Why does it have to be you're an Apple person, you're a Windows person? It's a similar kind of deal. I think it's an interesting point.
Well, that's sort of a weird one because it has to do with the evolution of the technology and closed versus open systems, I think.
I don't think people think that
that's not true for
thinking,
almost
they're
everyone,
not thinking
though.
that way. Yeah.
Yeah. No.
So I don't know.
iPhones
Some of it
versus
has
Androids.
to do with
iPhones versus Androids are not about the nitty gritty of the technology of it all.
No,
it
for
is,
sure.
It is very often people, and maybe I'm wrong about this. We all have iPhones in this room. Very often it's people that want to be cool and people that want to be contrarian very loudly and kind of destroying the other one. I had a conversation with this dude. This is as violent as everyone has been about this stuff. I was talking to this guy who had some Android phone, and I had an iPhone, and he didn't think. I don't know if he thought he was being an asshole or not. He's a friend of one of my old roommates. He just goes on, and he's like, yeah, I goes, this is a world phone, which is very important to me. And I'm like, yeah, because you go to San Luis Obispo sometimes. Good luck. And he's like, yeah,
That's nearby.
And I can do this, and this, and those things is really just, it's really just a toy. And I said to him, you know what, the world needs Pepsi too. And he was so angry. He goes, no. He goes, your phone is Pepsi. And I'm like, no, you're the one trying to convince me of anything. You're Pepsi, buddy. You know what? I'm glad Pepsi exists for you. But that's a similar thing. Is we got in an argument about the brand of our phones. That's really weird.
How much of it is defending your decision that you made?
Right.
You've aligned yourself with the Ravens or with your Apple phone.
Oh,
and phones seem trivial, but they're actually a huge deal. They're difficult to get. They're very expensive. You use them all day. There's a personal attachment to them through them to other people. And so it's very emotional. All this stuff seems like it's going back to like
It's all driven by emotion. And perhaps that's what's missing right now from the bench clearing brawls between World of Warcraft and League of Legends people is the emotional investment about what that game says about them. Because in a weird way, if you're so the reason why, Cleveland, the joke is the factory of sadness. That's always the joke about Cleveland sports teams. But like,
that's a really sad name.
it's
Which
really
are
sad
occasionally
name.
bad enough that they become Baltimore sports teams.
Well, that was a whole other thing altogether. but basically, like they've invested so much of their own self-worth into the success and failure of their team. Whether it's true or not, people do that all the time. And in a weird way, I do the same thing. I'm not saying it's conscious, and I'm not saying it's even correct, but I think that it all speaks to what you just said, which is you're justifying your decision. You're justifying what this thing says about your ability to pick a phone. Are you more of a dullard because you want your phone to be more simple, or are you more sort of intensely committed to security and privacy if you have a Linux phone or something like that? You know what I mean? Like they'll say things about you.
So
right?
is the equivalent, to use the phone analogy, like the part where I was saying I'm a fan of the Ravens but not a fan of a good game, like when you take the step from I'm a fan of a team to I'll watch any game, like is that partially diffusion mechanism because you don't have to fight with the guy next to you if you're willing to just talk football?
That's so interesting. I think the answer is yes. That's actually a really interesting thought because I
just love phones, man. I don't,
But-
whatever phone you got.
But hang on. But what you said is really, really true. The reason why the people that like I think just watching a good game are people that have so much of an emotional investment in their own game that it's more difficult to actually enjoy it. I think that's partially true. You can kind of enjoy the actual spectacle of the sport more if it doesn't have any sort of win-loss impact on you. Additionally, I do think it's also this. I think that we all think of ourselves as amateur coaches and tape watchers, and if we watch someone else play, it's like we understand the game more, and therefore we can somehow understand our own team more. There's sort of a volume effort there, and that, bringing back the technology thing, that would be why you'd have people that love taking things apart. You know what I mean? Like, you love taking things apart so you know all the actual physical pieces inside the phone, inside the TV, inside whatever it is that you have every single day, and you don't need to know what's inside.
Right.
But if you know what's inside, it somehow gives you a better understanding of the thing that you either like or are invested in or something like that.
Well, and when I hear that gives me hope for the state of, like, if the fact that you're arguing with this guy and he even knows what a world phone is means that we've progressed to a point where even if, like, so then I wonder if, when it comes to why sports are so culturally relevant, that there's some version of sport, if not combat sport, associated with every social, cultural epoch that we can, run through historically. Like, is part of it that it becomes a mechanism for teaching your society how to understand things on a granular level? It's like, you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Because instead of just bluntly having, like, here's a phone, I pick up the receiver, and then there's a voice. Like, when people argue about what's the better phone, they sort of, on some level, have to understand these are the 5 things I need to bring up in order to defeat Apple guy on why my phone is better.
Yeah.
And when that dude knows about those things, I have hope for the ability of people to learn those things and to advance their understanding of the world around them.
I think it's also that I have hope that I made the right decision, because very often when you look up the list of things, like the talking points to say, it's because you're going to get that question quite a bit. Here's an interesting point, though. I think that when it comes to when it comes to like the societal
Dancing.
importance of like, the societal importance of sports, is like, in a weird way, being a sports fan allows you to lose. It allows you to fail. It allows you to, in the binary live-die way, die and have it not be the end of the world. And I think that in a strange way, sports teach us, even though, there's soccer riots all the time and people burn stuff to the ground and they don't handle things like adults. But in a strange way, when my team loses a really, really big game and the world keeps going on, it's sort of a good lesson to learn as a human being. And I think that as we talk about the technology stuff too, I'm not saying that Elon Musk's interest in sports has anything to do with his success as a businessman or as an innovator, but I do think that is a guy who has no fear of losing. And I think the only way you can have a true lack of fear of losing is if you've done it before and life went on. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like Elon Musk, I think I read that like Tesla was like $850 million in the hole last year or something like that, and it's the number one best-selling electric car in the world now. And they're releasing the new one, the Model C, is that what it's called? The new like super affordable one, Model 3.
Yeah.
And that one needs to have a certain impact in order to do it. And everyone's like, "Oh, what's going to happen with him?" And Elon Musk is like,
I don't care.
I don't care. I don't care. I'm going to be fine. And guess what?
I'll
Speaking
just
of
fly
fandom,
away on my spaceship if I need to.
Yeah.
I'm only speaking for myself, but I'm pretty certain you guys are the same way. I'm openly rooting for Elon Musk. I am out there
Totally.
saying, I cannot wait till this works. This guy is going to change the way that the environment is, going to change the way that business is. He's going to colonize Mars before he's dead, which is like his crazy life goal thing. I'm rooting for that guy. That guy is fearless, and that guy does not care about things not going his way.
So is he
So
an
then-
example of a something that people can be a fan of, where there's not really a polarizing opposite, where you don't have to worry about someone on the other side?
What if you own an oil company?
I guess there are companies.
Why is no one a big fan of
It's a
the
question.
CEO of ExxonMobil? Does anyone know the CEO's name of
idea.
ExxonMobil?
Tex-
I'm sure some people do.
I guarantee someone calls him Tex.
Tex.
I don't know who, but it could be someone at the Cookie Mart. Someone just says, "Hey, Tex," and
Well,
and
I feel
that's
like this
their
is
thing.
a solid place to wrap it up, though. So let's do our engineering thing, and what's the moral at the end of this stuff? How should you like? I feel like we've had a good conversation about where sports fit into society, like what there is to learn about it. What do you take into the world with you, so that I don't have to look at somebody who's super fired up about their game and go, God, what a waste of effort.
Yeah, what's the
What a waste of energy that they could be spending on something that I find productive.
I've come to terms
Which
with
is completely subjective.
people's excitement around sports, and I enjoy sports more now, certainly, that I play a sport more aggressively. But what I still like to see is people being aware of what is going on and why they're choosing to act the way they're acting.
Yeah.
And so what's like the as one of the biggest sports fans I know, Rosolio, what are you like happiest to take away from a season, or reading about a new player, or predicting who in college is going to become a success? Like what aspects of all these things around sports
the
do you like really?
sport part, right? Because
What do you
I
take away-
understand
yeah.
what you take away from taking part in a team sport,
Right.
right? You learn how to cooperate. Like that's super valuable. But the part where when you watch other people cooperate, is that of enough value that it's a thing we should?
But that's the whole thing. Is I don't think your relationship is with the players. I think the relationship is with the other fans. I think the relationship in following a sport is the shared experience, and it is the communal experience that we kind of don't have anywhere else anymore.
That's a very good point.
We don't know everybody in our towns. We don't know people on our block. I don't know the names of people who live next door to me. Granted, LA is a little bit different, and whatever. But it is kind of, for better or worse, and there is this sort of the rampant alcoholism of tailgating, which is another thing people really enjoy about it. But and I'm kind of taking that out.
Excuse
lot of
to
drug
start
abuse
drinking at
going on.
10 o'clock on a Sunday.
Exactly. I mean, NASCAR exists because
AM.
people like crashes and people like booze. But I think that when you assess what someone's getting out of it, you got to look at what the people are experiencing next to one another. You got to look at the people in the sports bar who are wearing the same jersey, who have never met each other before in their lives, and having a conversation. And perhaps they'll never talk to each other again. They might never see each other again. But in that moment, they're sharing something with another human being, even if it's really trivial. And that's the thing about sports, is it can be totally trivial.
Everything's trivial.
But everything can be a little bit trivial. Yeah.
So-
And aren't you... I am glad when I see people interacting with one another as opposed to just kind of sitting in their own little bubble.
Right.
And sure, there are dark sides of it when you get in a fist fight with the guy wearing the other jersey, but more often than not, it really is the extremely casual two people sitting watching on a TV and they both agree on something about it. And that is something that is kind of not able to be replicated. As far as that moment in time, these people have something in common. They're going to start talking to one another.
So I think the message is, if you're not into sports, appreciate that tribe and that community and the value of that community. And if you are into sports,
2 on point. That's too boring.
try to appreciate the value of the same thing. Like that value is not in whether you win or lose. It's in that you get the guy next to you while you do whatever that thing is.
I
right?
think this comes back to
if you can take that away, you can take away the part where I feel like a fight is going to break out if I display my allegiance in the wrong stadium.
Sure.
This is one of the common themes that we come back to all the time in our podcast, which is the desire to communicate and open up channels of information sharing. And it's actually one of the things that I see about sports that I think this is kind of a sexist comment, I think, but it's one that will fly, I think, for everyone. Sports allow dudes to talk to each other. If you just put a bunch of dudes in a room and said, don't talk about sports, odds are that those dudes would just stand around.
I'm going to end up talking about sports, Will Ferrell movies, or iPhones.
So sports are like an incredible lubricant for a lot of people to get together and share.
He's the best.
It's a good dude. You seen Old School?
He's great. You guys are crazy. And beyond that, I would say if you're not into sports, I would say think about the thing that you get that experience in, whether it is Comic-Con. If people didn't crave that sort of communal experience, Comic-Con wouldn't be a thing. And think about if you're a big music fan, the people who've been to like 5 different Pearl Jam shows, or I know Adam's been to numerous Bruce Springsteen shows, and there's a feeling when you're in there. It's not just, it's a little bit different from just putting on your headphones and rocking out to Born in the USA. It is
Born in the USA.
Oh, the greatest Springsteen show I've ever been to was because of the group of people from New Jersey behind us that were wearing star-spangled headbands and cut-off jean jackets
and jorts,
just rocking the fuck out. It was outstanding.
Yeah, and but that's the thing, is that you remember those guys, and those guys had an impact on you in some menial way. So
their whiskey flask had an impact on me in a very real way.
In a physical way? Basically, I would say we all want this somehow. And whatever method by which we pursue it, it's still kind of ending up in the same place. And it's one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast all in the same room together, because it's way more fun to be in the same room together than it would be to Skype. And I think that in a very small way is what I get when I stand up at home wearing all my swag, holding my cane that I have to for superstitious purposes. Because at the end of the day, I know that at 4 o'clock Eastern time, I'm going to call my dad and we're going to talk about it. And I don't know that I'd call my dad otherwise randomly on a Sunday or that day at all. That day I'm going to talk to him. That day we're going to have a little conversation. And that's kind of cool. So
you're going to make me cry.
I cry all the time.
For real, though. It's, same place we end up most of this stuff. Go make something. Go talk to somebody. Go, whatever. Just don't hate on the people that don't want to do it your way. Right?
Basically, yeah.
So let's get out of here. I'm Adam.
I'm Brian.
I'm still Mike.
Thanks for coming over. And thanks, everybody, for hanging out. Same deal as always. Find us wherever you found us. Rate and review us on iTunes. Goes a long way. You can email us at hello@zengineering.com. You can buy swag at stuff.zengineeringpodcast.com.
Oh, yeah, totally.
I'm sorry, that's hello@zengineeringpodcast.com. Zengineering is owned by some Indian company with just a...
What's our actual website? You can get to all these things on the website.
Zengineeringpodcast.com is your hub for any of this stuff if you can't find it. But thanks for sticking around for 10 episodes.
Super exciting.
According to the stats,
you mean one
I think
episode.
we have maybe 27 regular listeners.
All right.
That's a ton.
So, keep it up, peeps.
If they were all in this room right now, it would be really crowded.
So should we do this the way we usually do? I'm Adam.
I'm Brian.
I'm Mike.
Right. Have a rock and rollin' afternoon.
They don't know what I know. They don't know.
Let's maybe not try to guess what people like based on what they look like.